Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Spacecast, the podcast in space. I'm your host, Alex the Alien. To start off, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of you who are returning to the podcast. And for those of you who are new, I'd like to say welcome. I have been sitting outside of Earth about 500 years now, just watching the development of human civilization. After all, I haven't had much else to do after being banished from my home galaxy in the Alpha Quadrant after a minor traffic incident and a failure to appear in court. But I digress. For those of you returning to the show, you know we've had some very interesting episodes related to humans and all their interesting little behaviors. You may recall the 3-part series on the 90s career of the rapper Ice Cube and his movie appearances, and another series where we discussed British cuisine and just why it's so terrible. But this time I'm going to shift gears a little bit and take some time to think about contemporary human society and what it means to live as a human on Earth in the 21st century. To start us off, we're going to discuss 4 terms: globe, world, planet, and Earth. Now, the latter 2 terms I'm going to leave to the physicists and geologists. Mostly, I'm going to be focusing on the terms globe and world. The term globe is important because back in the day, humans believed that the horizon might just expand forever. But after realizing that it was a globe, here's what that implies. After a certain level of expansion, eventually the whole thing will be occupied and everything will become connected. That's the conundrum that humans are faced with right now. There's nowhere else to go. There's no horizon to move towards. Everything's already been occupied. Now, the next term is world. According to the online etymology dictionary, the term world comes from the Old English wor old, or, quote, human existence, the affairs of life, unquote. The term world doesn't refer to the spinning rock that humans live on. Rather, it refers to the human experience and what it feels like to be a human and what humans feel that they ought to do and where they ought to go. And right now, humans are trying to figure out the nature of this world and how they can live happily and prosper inside of it. Now, I could care less whether or not humans figure out the nature of the world they're living in, or whether they live or die or nuke each other or whatever. I'm just amused to see what they're coming up with. And that's what today's episode of Spacecast is about. What are they coming up with right now? What do they think is the nature of the world they're living in? One human who's thought a lot about this question is Michael Denning in his book, Culture in the Age of 3 Worlds. I'm going to read a few snippets from this book, just so y'all can get a little sense of what's going on in humans' little noggins right now. Then I'll be outsies for this episode of Spacecast. This is from Denning's Culture in the Age of 3 Worlds, on page 23. Alright, everybody fasten your seatbelts. Alright. The fundamental arguments focus on the nature of the circuit, the flow. Is it a logic of homogenization or one of hybridization? At what point in the circuit is power generated? And at what points does it encounter resistance? Arjun Apparati's well-known general theory of global cultural flows, made up of 5 dimensions: ethnoscapes, technoscapes, financescapes, mediascapes, and ideoscapes, is built on the image of movement through a medium. Quote, this mobile and unforeseeable relationship between mass-mediated events and migratory audiences, unquote. For my students, this model of global cultural flow as the master narrative of globalization was an ingrained common sense, making certain topics seem like ideal globalization papers. In general, they fell into 3 genres. First, the worldwide distribution and reception of some cultural industry practice, like the advertising of Marlboros in Southeast Asia, or the place of hip-hop in French youth culture. Second, the emergence of hybrid, creolized popular forms, Jamaican reggae, for example, and the question of whether they had been co-opted, commodified, and westernized, or whether they remained part of a resistant, subaltern social movement, and third, the promise of a form that would create a new global community based on the virtues of migration and media, this latter figured by the internet, the World Wide Web, and the idea of a global net. All right. Well, according to my monitors, it seems that we've lost about half of our listeners. But for those of you who are left, maybe let's dive into this a little bit, okay? So Denning has this idea of a global circuit, right? So since the world is a globe and all of it has been occupied and society has expanded to the level that it's expanded, commodities, business transactions, nations, everything is connected in a circuit. So if we imagine the world today as a giant clustery circuit board, it's split into 5 dimensions according to Denning: ethnoscapes, technoscapes, financescapes, mediascapes, and ideoscapes. Alright, so I'll try to break down those 5. So ethnoscapes, right? Ethnicities, peoples. Technoscapes, technology and how it appears in each culture and how it's expanded over each culture. Financescapes, economies and how they're connected with one another. And mediascapes, how information is broadcasted through technology. And ideoscapes, which refers to ideology, beliefs that transcend ethnicities, ideologues. So all of these things, all of these dimensions of society, all of these facets of human society, Denning says it's built on the image of a movement through a medium. So that goes back to the circuit board analogy. So to this human Denning, the entire world is a circuit board. And what that means is that it goes across nations. So all of these things, media, ideology, technology, it travels around the entire world. It isn't confined to any one space. And so he talks about the advertising of Marlboros in Southeast Asia or hip-hop in French youth culture. Certain cultural things that might be isolated to a certain portion of the world are now circuiting around the entire world. So if the contemporary world is a circuit board through which media, technology, ideology is constantly flowing, economies, finances, it's all flowing, the question for Denning is, okay, all of these things, ideology, media, across cultures, is everything homogenizing or are things hybridizing? That is to say, are different cultural influences and identities smashing into each other and creating new things? Or is contemporary global culture just like the blob? It's just a homogeneous gray mass that's consuming everything and leaving little differentiation between anything? And that's a wonderful question. Well, thank you for joining me today in Spacecast. I'm eager to see how this all pans out, but again, I don't really care. And we will see you next time in the episode. I don't know, I'm thinking about maybe covering like Spanish dishes or Spanish cuisine. We'll find out. We'll just play it by ear. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.